I mean, I think the main thing is if you take anything away from this, it's you should try paper piecing. If you look on YouTube, I think they have some really, really good basic videos. And I would say like probably 7 out of 8 people that try it like are addicted. 1 out of 8 says, no, that didn't work for my brain. But I highly recommend at least trying it, maybe trying 2 things before you decide if it works for your brain or not, because it's a very relaxing, very fulfilling method, and it is very fabric friendly. So if you have scraps,
I do.
You know, it is 100% good for getting your scraps used up. So yeah, it's really fun. I do think it's really intimidating for some people the very first time, but I cannot recommend it enough for the kind of creativity and options it unlocks compared to traditional piecing. It's nice to meet you.
Okay, great. Well, you too. I'm Karyl. And we're going to be talking today about like how you make your patterns, paper piecing, how you get your inspiration and all that. So if there's anything you want to put in to start, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll start with asking you questions.
Yeah, why don't you ask me questions? I'm sure we'll cover more that way.
For years, and I've never gone to a class or done it. It just sounds really complicated. What is it exactly?
So I grabbed a couple examples because I thought that would be easier. So one of the biggest, paper piecing, in my opinion, is really easy. The main problem people run into is just that the idea is unfamiliar. And then like the very first time you try it, there's like a little bit that has to click in your brain before you understand how to do it. But once it clicks in your brain, everything is easy from there on out. And you can just, the thing I love about paper piecing, which I think I paper pieced before I think paper piecing was I made like a couple t-shirt quilts. And then the very next thing I ever quilted was paper piecing. So the first time I used like good fabric and did anything with it was already paper piecing. And I love it because you don't have to worry about seam allowances. You don't have to worry about like corners matching, and you can use it to make shapes that are impossible really to make just by cutting and sewing together fabric traditionally. So I'll show a couple examples. So I was hoping I would find this, and I did. I found like an old block I was using. This is from one of my quilt designs. And this is actually not a great example of when you need to paper piece, because obviously this shape you could make using traditional rectangles.
Right, exactly.
But this is the only thing I could find that actually still had paper on the back of it. And the reason actually, even for something like this, I prefer to paper piece because I don't have to line anything up and it's perfect every time, right? So these lines are all crisp. Nothing has to be matching here. I don't have to pre-cut any of these pieces. I could use big scraps of each. I could make it when you're making something that's actually scrappy. You can literally be grabbing pieces at random. You don't have to plan ahead.
But I'm really confused.
Sure. Okay. So if I was paper piecing this square, basically what you do is you take each piece. So I would start here with this piece. This piece of fabric I would put on facing up, like facing you the way it looks right now. The next piece, which is this piece, you're not going to, normally these would have numbers on the back. I was doing this on the fly and like, I already know how to do it. So I don't number it. But normally these would all have numbers and say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the order that you're going to add your pieces of fabric.
Okay.
So you start with a piece that's facing up. Then this next section, which would have a 2 on it that you want to cover, you take a piece of fabric that's big enough to cover that. And you would lay it on top of the piece you already have. You'd sew on the back of this, on the paper, you'd sew along this line. And then when you push that fabric back, it would cover the like related section. And this is what I mean. Paper piecing sounds kind of complicated when I'm trying to like verbally tell it to you like this. When you get like a very basic paper piecing pattern and sit down and just like, don't really think too hard, just follow the instructions, like step by step, after you get 4 pieces of fabric on, you're going to be like, I see, I just, I'm using these to create perfect seams. You set your stitch length really short so that you're perforating the paper.
Uh-huh.
And after you've added all your pieces, you just rip all the paper off the back, which some people find this really tedious. I find it really satisfying, put on a movie, tear the paper off all the back of your pieces. And what you're left with is just normal, seams.
Uh-huh.
And all you've used the paper to do really is to make very, very crisp lines. And because you're not having to pre-line up fabric on squares, essentially, you can make all kinds of things, shapes that you can't really make. So this is another example. So this is something I paper pieced, right?
Oh.
This would be really hard to do if I was traditionally cutting out all of these pieces of fabric, right?
Right.
But because you're paper piecing, each of these little sections was just a little spot on my paper that had a number on it. And I just found a piece of fabric bigger than that spot and then added them in order by overlapping it, sewing on the seam, flipping it back, iron, next piece, overlap, sew on the seam, flip it back, iron.
Okay.
And at the end, you just rip all the paper off. And you can make all kinds of things that here's another example. This would be difficult to make. Using even just flying geese, I'd have to keep changing all the angles after after I did each one.
Right.
Letters are really good. Paper piecing is great for lettering.
Oh, wow.
Right. You can do all kinds, basically the more angles you have, the more little pieces you have to use and all there, that makes it more complex. A advanced paper piecing pattern would be one that has a lot of smaller pieces you're messing with. But you can do really easy paper piecing patterns and it has a big impact. I wish I had, my most popular pattern, I don't have, we're packing up to move. So I don't have that quilt out, and it actually uses huge pieces. It's very, very, very easy paper piecing. It's the easiest paper piecing you can do. It just doesn't use traditional squares or traditional triangles. So you couldn't actually replicate that pattern without paper piecing.
Okay.
Maybe you could, but it would be very, very difficult. Yeah.
So it is a pattern.
Yeah. So,
but you just don't put it together like a regular pattern.
Yeah, you have to print templates. So the very first step in paper piecing, you get your fabrics together and then you print paper templates that you're going to I always think of the paper, it's the foundation you're building your piece upon, your fabric piece, and then you rip the foundation off at the end and you're left with just the fabric that you've now, joined together properly. But yeah, the very first step is printing out a bunch of paper templates. So even my paper patterns that I sell, if you buy a paper pattern, it comes with a link where you go to download and print full, 8.5 by 11 templates.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's really fun. I do think it's really intimidating for some people the very first time, but I can't recommend it enough for the kind of creativity and options it unlocks compared to traditional piecings.
Do you just, do you make all your own patterns? Or templates, I should say. Templates, sure. I guess.
Yeah, I do all my own templates. I've used varying different programs over the years. I use a bunch of Adobe products Photoshop. I use, it kind of changes, I feel every once a year, depending on what computer I have and all that kind of stuff. There's a Quilting.
Yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask you is what computer program do you use?
I use a number of different ones depending on what I'm working on. I use Photoshop a lot. It's not the best program actually for this. They make some quilting specific ones, but it's the one I used first because I already had access to it. So the whole Adobe suite of design programs, I tend to use those the most, even though they're actually more complicated than they need to be. You could make a paper piecing template with a piece of paper and a ruler and a pencil if you wanted. It doesn't this one, for example, right? This wouldn't need to be on the computer. If you wanted to make this, if you just started drawing your triangle, basically if you draw a shape, then using a ruler, you can kind of project out where your lines need to be I wouldn't recommend this obviously unless you had done a couple paper piecing projects. But the actual like template design, I usually do just on paper. And then the only reason I ever put it into the computer is because I need it to be replicated beyond just like me making it. Yeah. The computer work, I try to do the like very, very, very last, because the earlier in the process I do it, the more times I have to revise it, because for projects, I end up doing like 5 different versions before I'm happy. You know, I keep tweaking things along the way. So I learned to not get to the computer part until I'm all the way done with the design.
I have optical illusion picture that I want to turn into a pattern or a paper piecing thing. And I don't have like a computer program or anything. And the math is way too complicated. How would you recommend I go about making myself a pattern?
So is it so it's a picture that you have? Could you like make a copy? Like, how big of a picture is it?
It's just an 8x10.
Yeah. So if I had an 8x10 picture of something that I was trying to turn into that exact thing into a pattern, I would probably make a copy, like scan a copy of that picture and just print it out. And then you could just take a pencil and you start like tracing the major shapes. To be honest, like if you haven't done paper piecing, it would be pretty hard to like accomplish this until you had done a couple patterns, just because it, okay, here, I see. Okay. So you want to do this in fabric, like this picture of the t-shirt.
Right. I want to make a quilt like that.
Okay. So you want not the actual t-shirt part, just like the actual quilt part. Okay. Right. So this is exactly something that you could do with paper piecing. If you were making it in a full quilt size, that will be complicated, because paper piecing is really best for either things that are small like this, or things that are, like a quilt that has blocks, right? If you're doing something on a full scale like that, you hypothetically could paper piece it, but you would need like a lot of individual templates.
Right.
So I wouldn't really recommend that. It would be pretty advanced.
Okay.
Not advanced. It would just be cumbersome. You might be able to achieve a similar result traditionally piecing if you're more familiar with that.
Do my old-fashioned way.
Yeah. It's not quite the right fit for a paper piecing project, I would say.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I'll stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I would start. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would start with something, especially like I would start with something that's not really bigger than like a mug rug for your very first project, or like a couple projects, because it really is. It's kind of like math. Like it's just gonna click once you have to like look at it, feel the way that it works, and then it clicks more than thinking it through too hard ahead of time. Okay,
all right, good. Well, that's great.
I mean, almost anybody can do it. I mean, I ran a postcard swap a couple of years ago that had like hundreds of participants, most of whom had not paper pieced before. And I hardly got any, I didn't have to do hardly any like individual coaching. I did some training along the way, like group coaching of saying, this is how these patterns work, but everyone picked it up pretty fast. So I would say the average quilter can do it. You don't have to be a math person or, anything.
Is it a lot faster than regular quilting?
It depends on what you're doing. I think it's a lot faster because it's probably technically slower, actually. Yeah, if you're making like an actual full-size quilt, it's probably slower. To me, it feels faster because I get to spend the time on the part I like, which is the sewing, and less time on the planning and cutting and making sure things line up. So I love paper piecing because it's very methodical. You can put on Criminal Minds and watch a whole season while you're just, adding your fabrics and doing your thing and then ripping everything off. It's just very methodical. It's easy to pick it up and put it back down. You don't get as easily disorganized in my experience as with a full-size quilt where you pre-cut everything. Yeah.
So where do you get most of your inspiration for your designs from? Is it from pictures or?
I really like shapes. I think it's mainly shapes. You know, if I am out somewhere and I see kind of a geometric picture, it might give me an idea. It's funny, my like most popular quilt is called the Color Jolt quilt. And the original title, the original title of this quilt, when it was just like a draft file on my computer, was Falling Sticks, because I had seen something where these like bars were falling down on a painting, and I thought that looked cool. And so once I started playing with it, though, I ended up changing everything about it. But yeah, it started from like, oh, I think this is like a striking image usually that I see somewhere else, you know.
Uh-huh.
And it always changes drastically from like the first thing I'm sketching looks nothing like what it ends up being like, because you start making changes based on what will work best for actually quilting it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just curious, what machine do you use and do you have good luck with it? I just had to have 10 days off while my husband repaired my machine again. And I just wonder what you were using.
You know what? I am impressed that your husband can repair your machine.
Oh yeah, he's fabulous. He's taken them right down to the frame more than once and put the whole thing back together.
That's handy.
I seem to have a negative effect on mechanical things.
I'm the handy one in my relationship, and I always but sewing machines are a little bit beyond me. All the pieces are a little smaller than I'm willing to mess with. I can do a lot of things like with the drill, but I'm getting in there and figuring out what needs to be oiled or not oiled and stuff. Seems
what make
hard.
do you have?
I have a Singer sewing machine. So I actually used for a long time, probably the first 3 years I was quilting, I quilted on a Singer. I don't even know the model, that was literally my mother's sewing machine from when she was a child. So I was quilting on like a very small, I made like t-shirt quilts and stuff like that on that machine. And then when I got married, my in-laws got me a like bigger Singer sewing machine. And I have been sewing on that for 7 years. And about once a year, I consider like if I should get something more powerful. But I just like spending my money on fabric more than spending my money on a sewing machine. And
Me too.
It gets the job done. So every time I look at them, I'm like, $7,000 for a really nice sewing machine. $7,000 could buy a lot of fabric. So I always just put it off. But
I have a Singer. Well, I have a Singer too, and it does the job for me. It's just a really basic machine. I used to have a Bernina, but all that computer stuff was just, my husband couldn't fix that very well. So I went back.
Every time I considered buying something where I was going to get like a Bernina or something like that, I kept finding that my Singer actually has the combination of features that are kind of hard to find all in another sewing machine. So, I was surprised how much I would have to pay for a sewing machine that did all of the things that my Singer actually does. So if it's not broke, don't fix it,
Yeah, that's good to know. Because I've been thinking, well, maybe I should get another machine, or something. But this one, like I mostly do straight stitch and a really nice satin stitch, zigzag. And so that's what I use, and it works great for me. So
yeah, I'm the same way. That's exactly the same things I use. So I'm like, I can adjust the stitch length the way I like it. I already know how this one works. I like the way that it's loaded. I like that I can see my bobbin and stuff. I don't have to load it under there. All that stuff is worth it for me. I think my like where I put the thread in is even broken. I had to like fix how it's holding my thread, but it works.
So what do you enjoy designing the most? Like your little mug rugs or the bigger wall hangings, or
I think I like designing full quilts the best now. I started with mug rugs and stuff, and I still find those like very satisfying projects. They're really, really fast. I could design a mug rug in a day. And I tend to make them in response to something. So like this was designed because it was my mother-in-law's birthday in 2 days. And so I have kids, and, you know, things had gotten away from me, and I suddenly realized it was her birthday in 2 days. And so I, you know, sat down and sketched this one up and made it in like, you know, 2 evenings essentially. And stuff like that, I tend to then go back and spend the extra couple days finalizing it and actually making it a pattern, because I just like seeing when people recreate things that I made. But if I'm sitting down and like daydreaming about and designing, it's almost always full-size quilts now. So, yeah.
So you sell your patterns on your website?
Yeah, I sell them on Etsy and on my website. I just had a baby 7 months ago, and
wow.
Yeah, so I haven't slept and I have a 2.5-year-old, so I haven't slept in years, basically. But I was kind of sick before I had the baby, and then going from 1 kid to 2 kids has been crazy. And then now we're moving. So I tend to like do most of my sales on Etsy, which is great because when you have your own website, a lot of times, a lot of that is like putting out new designs and newsletters and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where activity happens when I'm being really active. But Etsy is amazing because during this time that I've needed to kind of take off with my family, you know, my work is still out there, and, you know, people still find it, and I still get emails and stuff of quilts people have made from it. And I just love that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
We have an Etsy shop too.
Yeah. So, isn't it great?
It is. I really like it.
Yeah.
So,
and people are so nice. I always hear horror stories about customers being mean to people on Etsy, and I have literally never had a negative experience with a single, and maybe that's because quilters are really nice, but yeah, I have had very positive experiences with everyone.
Oh. So. Well, great. Well, that's all I can think to ask. If you have anything else to add, just shout out.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the main thing is, if you take anything away from this, it's you should try paper piecing. If you look on YouTube, I think they have some really, really good basic videos. And I would say like probably 7 out of 8 people that try it like are addicted. 1 out of 8 says, no, that didn't work for my brain. But I highly recommend at least trying it, maybe trying 2 things before you decide if it works for your brain or not, because it's a very relaxing, very fulfilling method, and it is very fabric friendly. So if you have scraps,
I do.
You know, it is 100% good for getting your scraps used up. Like I could have, you know, I used like 7 different fabrics in here, and I only had to have like, you know, this big a piece of each of them to make this. So, you know, if you are a fabric hoarder and you end up with a lot of fabric, paper piecing is a great way to hit some of the things that are never going to make it.
I don't know a quilter who isn't a fabric hoarder.
I know. I'm already having to think like, oh, if we're moving across the country, I probably should just sell my fabric and then buy new stuff when I get there. So we'll see. Yeah.
Where are you moving?
We might be moving to North Carolina. We're in Minnesota now. We'll see what happens.
Wow. Good luck with your move.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, it was really nice meeting you and talking with you.
Yeah. It was nice to meet you too.
I promise I won't be scared of paper piecing now. And perhaps I'll try it.
If you try it, let me know. I would love to see what you make the first time. So
okay. Yeah. We'll do that. Great.
That sounds great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. You have a good day, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.